Welcome to the Tablet Advertising Professionals podcast. My name is Brett Miller. Tablet Advertising Professionals is a group dedicated to all things tablet advertising, whether it be iPad, Android devices, whether it be in-app or browser-based. Today we're going to be looking at the tablet market, how it's growing and why that matters, and then apps versus Safari browser. There's been a lot of debate on where the marketing dollars should go and where the advertising dollars should go, and we're going to take a look at the two different alternatives and some of the pros and cons for both of them. First of all, one of the things that we get asked a lot is, what's the difference between HTML5 and Flash? Why does it matter? As you may or may not know, Flash does not work on the iPhone or the iPad, any iOS device, and most Android devices. And most expandable and rich media ads today that exist online are built in Flash. So if you try to load those up on a tablet, they don't work. It makes for a pretty bad user experience, and the click-through rates and the engagement's not there either. So we're seeing a rise because of the popularity of the iPhone and the iPad. We're seeing a rise in HTML5 technology and a sort of decline in Flash, which is unfortunate for Adobe, but they're working on some features to let people convert things over. But as we see it, the web's sort of moving to HTML5, and that's why it's important that your ads, your rich media ads, work and are HTML5 compatible. So Web 1.0 wasn't designed for tablets. There's a lot of stuff like swiping, gestures, all those cool things that you can do and engage with your tablet that you can't do with Web 1.0. So galleries, everything's based on a mouse and clicking. And so it's important to kind of take that in consideration too, both from a publisher point of view and from an advertiser. A lot of people don't have the time to convert everything over for lack of HTML5 resources. They don't have teams to convert, to build, so that's also important to keep in mind. You don't want to double your efforts, and with HTML5, it'll run across all platforms. So instead of having to build a desktop version in Flash and a version in HTML5 for the tablet and the iPhone, you just build one version and it works on everything. And customers want interactive ads. I mean, it's pretty simple. Everyone's used to things that they can engage with, things that they can touch. So those sort of static display ads that you can just click and it takes you away, that doesn't get interest anymore. People sort of have blinders on for those type of ads. So again, interactivity is key. So the tablet market, it's growing, and analysts predict it's going to continue to grow exponentially. So by the time 2005 comes around, you're looking at around 300,000 tablets sold, which brings the grand total to about 650,000 tablet users out there. It's already almost 5% of the browsing market in the United States, which is huge considering the iPad didn't exist just a few years ago. It's a force that can no longer be ignored. And then primary computer. At the beginning, everyone thought that tablets were just for media consumption, but a lot of users are actually using it for everything now. Email, work. There's a lot of great spreadsheet and word processing documents out there now. Presentations. There's some great presentation tools, including SlideRocket, which we use frequently, and they allow you to just download your presentations right onto your iPad. You have little dongles that you can plug in to play them through a projector. You have all sorts of opportunities. So anyway, by the 2012, just in the last 2 years, over 46% of iPad owners say the iPad has become their primary computer, and that's up from about 30% 2 years ago. So that's huge. And as more people start to use it as their primary computer, the developers are going to go in there and they're going to make sure that those features are in there, and that it's no longer just considered a device for media consumption. It's no longer just a toy. It's something that real business is done on. So people are able to get rid of their notebooks. People are able to get rid of their desktops and just use the iPad. It's also easier to take with you. So it makes sense that it's going to be your primary device. You use it while you're sitting in front of the TV. You can pack it in your backpack. You can throw it in your car. It's just a really, really handy device to have. And the current state, iPad owners tend to be more affluent. So you've got about 46% that live in households with an income of over 100,000 or more, and that's for iPad. But tablets, the prices come down. Amazon Kindle just released a bunch of new models. iPad Mini is supposed to be out very soon, and I'm guessing that they'll probably knock the price in half to around the $250 range. So as the prices come down on the technology, more and more, the audience becomes more and more broad. So again, I don't really see this as being something that the trend continues for, and I see it becoming more mainstream device, which is great if you've got ads and you're publishing on the tablet, but the audience is going to be much more broad. Okay, the tablet device satisfaction. Again, I mentioned Android before, Kindle Fire. Android is on several different tablets. Apple, obviously, they've got the iPad 2, and then the new iPad. Overall, the satisfaction's been the best for the iPad through surveys. Kindle Fire is second, and Android is third. And I think part of the reason for that is the Android market is so fragmented, so it's a little bit more difficult to develop for. It's harder to build a consistent experience when you've got all these different tablets and all these different sizes, whereas Apple's quality control might not be as open, but at the same time, you have the ability to put a really nice user experience together. So apps versus browser. Let's take a look at apps first. The pros of apps. Well, first of all, they're native, which means they're fast. Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg just recently came out and said their biggest mistake in HTML5 was focusing on that only and not building a native app for the iPhone. Just it's less responsive. Secondly, you don't have access to the features of the device from a web-based HTML5 platform or publisher site. So that means you can't upload photos unless it's an app. You can't take advantage of some of the features of the other features of the hardware unless it's an app. So those are really, really big pros for having native applications. And they're also simple. You go to the App Store, you download the app, it's on your device, and you can send out updates, people update it quickly, all that stuff are definite pros of the apps. Now, cons, lack of search, and what I mean by that is it's harder to research and find information through apps. Every app is very isolated, which means it doesn't really talk to other apps very well. The World Wide Web is a web because everything's connected. You do a search, you find something, you click, you go to another site, you click, you go to another site, and it's all kind of connected in the whole World Wide Web ecosystem. Whereas apps are very siloed. If it's not there, you're not going to find it. You're going to have to switch to a Safari app, and then you're going to have to search there. So it becomes sort of complicated for people who like to research and move around a lot, which is sort of the behavior that the internet's designed for. 1 second you're checking an email, then you get a link to YouTube, then you see another YouTube video and you click on that, and it just becomes this whole thing. So having that ability in the browser as opposed to apps is definitely beneficial. And then it's difficult to track, especially with ads. A lot of things, that's one of the big problems with in-app advertising right now is you don't have that constant connection. Apps are closed off. It's very difficult to put tracking in them. So let's take a look at a browser and what the pros are. So for this example, we're going to use the Safari browser for the iPad, and that's just the most common one. That's the one Apple installs on it when you get your iPad, and it works very similar to Chrome, which actually also has an iPad app now, and Chrome on the desktop or Mac PC, it doesn't matter. It's just a web browser. So the first thing is they're open. Which means you don't have to go to the App Store. You're not required to get Apple's approval. You can do whatever you want. You don't have to give them a cut if you're a publisher, which is why a lot of publishers, including the New York Times, just released a web-based version of their tablet app, because that way they don't have to go through the store. So they do an HTML5 version of it. It doesn't have the benefits of a native app, but you also have complete control, and you don't have to cut Apple into it. It's easily connected for the same reasons that apps don't work well together. Browsers do. You can jump from site to site. Everything's sort of connected within the browser. You don't have to continue to switch apps. And it works across multiple platforms. This is probably the biggest deal. So if you develop an iPhone app, and you want to reach an Android audience, well, guess what? You're out of luck because they don't have the iPhone app. So you'd have to develop an iPhone app, then you'd have to develop an Android app, then you'd have to develop a Windows app, and all these different apps for all these different app stores. Whereas if you build something in HTML5, it's accessible in the browser. Any browser can access it, even outside of tablets. There's some really cool web design now where it'll conform to whatever browser you're looking. So whether that's iPhone, desktop, tablet, just another huge pro for HTML5 and browser applications. And then you have the cons, which they're potentially slower, depending on your connection, depending on how efficient the code is on your site. There's a lack of buzz. Apps are kind of a buzzword right now, so HTML5 is kind of getting there, but for some reason, people really like apps. There's really no metrics to prove why they like apps. They just like apps because they were told by someone that they're supposed to like apps. Web-based applications don't really have that buzz. And then there's the quality control issue. You don't really have someone checking out the code to make sure it's efficient. You've got a lot of different things running. People can have browser plugins and things that slow their experience down. Ad blockers are another thing that some people do install on their browsers. And they're not very common, but it does happen. And you don't really have control over that because it's not in an app. So let's take a look at the numbers. Forbes just released this actually last week, I believe, and it's talking specifically about news sites and how people consume news on the tablet. Most people prefer browsers and actually checking their news through the browsers as opposed to apps. So 60% prefer tablets and they get their news mostly from browsers, and 23% get their news mostly from apps. And all major publishers do have apps. Again, I think it has to do with if someone sends you if you find something, it's easier to share if you're on a browser. So if you see an article and you want to share it to your friend, you email him the link, he can pull it up, no problem. In an app, that becomes a much harder task. And then 16% say both equally. So sometimes they use apps, sometimes they use the browser. But for apps to be around as long as they are, this is a pretty strong indicator of where people really like to go, and that's the browser because it connects them with everything and not just that one source from one app. Okay, so I hope that gives you a great overview of sort of what's going on with the browser and app debate. Next week, we're going to look at tablet engagement metrics. So you get an idea on what those ads can do compared to display now. And so instead of apps versus browser on a tablet, let's take a look at tablets versus desktops. So that's next week. And also how to build engaging ads. What little things can you do to your ads on a tablet that'll just skyrocket your engagement rates? And then finally, just to kind of close it up, we're going to have a nice case study where we show metrics on a campaign that was run on an iPad only and versus the desktop and how crazy the engagement rates were in comparison. So make sure that you subscribe to the podcast. Make sure you visit our YouTube channel. And feel free to email me with questions. That's brett.miller@agentdigital.com. And of course, check out AdTouch and some of the things that Agent's doing with tablet advertising. So until next week, take care.